Okay, we're live. So it is Thursday, May 15th, 2014. It's 11 a.m. Pacific. However, I'm on the East Coast time zone right now. And this is DB Hangops. Today we're going to be talking about MySQL Fabric. We're going to have a presentation by Morgan Talker. And so real quick, let's do a round of introductions. My name's Jeff Anderson. I'm a DBA at Box. Morgan?
My name is Morgan Talker. I'm MySQL Community Manager at Oracle.
And Tim?
Hi, I'm Tim Callahan with Tokutech.
And we have someone else in here, David Stokes, but he hasn't chimed in yet. So maybe his audio or microphone will start working a little bit. And so Dave, just let me know when you're all set to go in the chat room. So yeah, I mean, we were a little light on topics last time, and so Fabric it's kind of one of those canned things that people are really excited about, but not a lot of people have toyed with. And so Morgan graciously offered to talk about it today, and as of about 20 minutes ago, I think started putting together a demo. I'm holding him to that, and I'm really grateful that he did. So without further ado, Morgan, go ahead and take it away.
Sure, I'll try my best with the demo. Maybe I'll get someone to speak in between. I'll just continue setting that up. But I guess from a high level, what MySQL Fabric is it's a framework to be able to manage farms of MySQL servers. So for a long time, people have used MySQL. They've used it in large deployments, but what they've written to be able to do that is largely their own bootstrapping and orchestration scripts. And we're now stepping into that space where we're offering a set of tools, or a tool in this case, to be able to manage that better. So Fabric offers high availability in that we allow you to fail over to another replica server automatically if something fails, and it offers sharding as well in a sort of translucent way that's I guess available as an API to the application to be able to pick a correct shard for where data from a particular key is located. That's the high level. Fabric is in release candidate now. We first talked about this tool, MySQL Fabric, last year at MySQL Connect. It's written in Python. It's proxyless in that it's connector aware. We support Python, Java, and PHP. These connectors connect to a Fabric server via an XML RPC interface, and they find out the topology of what's the current server or correct server for a particular shard key.
Cool. So one of the things that I want to call out, because I was also trying to get Fabric set up on my personal machine before this, just to kind of mess with it. So currently, if you go to the download page for the MySQL utility, since Fabric is bundled there, just a thing to be aware of is that by default, it'll put you on the generally available tab for downloads. Fabric is not included in the generally available build of MySQL utilities yet. So you have to make sure you click the development tab, and I can take a screenshot of that in a second to show folks. But I just wanted a public FYI, if you download the utilities and Fabric isn't in there, you might have the generally available version right now. And so like Morgan said, the latest release candidate is what's going to actually have it.
Yeah, and I think the same would have to happen with the Python connector that Fabric will depend on. I believe you'll have to have the release candidate version of that as well. If you downloaded other and it's worked successfully, I would be curious, but Fabric itself depends on Python. It's written in Python, and I use Mac OS X as my development machine, and we have a DMG download for Fabric and Python connector to be able to install it and set it up. In the MySQL manual as well, there's a quick start guide to be able to show you how to set up a Fabric installation running on localhost and have multiple copies of MySQL running on your individual machine so that you can sort of scale down and emulate what a production environment might look like.
Yeah, and so to that point, Morgan, I actually have that, I think I have that manual up right here. If you just go to Google and search for MySQL Fabric, this is one of the pages will come up on. And so like I was saying, the first page under here is downloading, which gives you information about the utilities link and the connectors. And so let me just bring these up real fast. So with the utilities, just make sure you go to development releases, and like Morgan said, there's a DMG for OS 10, and any of the other distributions, you can get those. And then same goes for the connectors, which was linked off of here somewhere.
You could go scroll back up to the top and click Downloads, Connectors, and then find Python.
Got it, yeah. And so if you get to that,
Excellent.
you get to the downloads page here, and then again, just make sure you pull the development release right now, which is the RC candidate, and it's right there. And once you have those two things installed, I was able to get the Fabric tool running, and you can kind of get rolling at that point.
Yeah, it's fairly light on dependencies. I would say that the harder part is just making sure you have the right connector, and then making sure that you can successfully run multiple copies of MySQL running on your local machine. You need a little bit of RAM to do that. I was running with a set of 3 shards, making sure all the shards had HA, so I was up to 7 copies of MySQL D running on my laptop.
So I actually have a really quick question here, Morgan.
Sure.
Am I able to run Fabric with anyone that's just MySQL compatible? So could I be running an instance of TokuTech, maybe InfiniDB, and be able to use Fabric to work between them?
I can't think of any specific dependencies other than MySQL 5.6. So it requires GTID support. And I know that TokuTech, last I checked, was release candidate on 5.6 or some experimental state. Maybe for Tim to comment. Is it GA on 5.6? Yeah.
No, it's not. Our first 5.6 availability is going to be via Percona Server 5.6. So we'll be, and the goal for that is GA soon. So we should have a 5.6 build available through the Percona team in the not so distant future. I actually have a question, Morgan, because I've
Sure.
sat on a couple of Fabric presentations, and I listened to you kind of frame what Fabric is. Where I'm still slightly confused, and maybe you doing some comparing and contrasting versus the commercially available, I'll call them sharding technologies for MySQL. I heard a couple I heard high availability. I heard sharding. I didn't necessarily hear transparent sharding. So I'm still trying to get my head around what is the goal of Fabric.
Sure. So let's call it translucent sharding rather than transparent sharding.
Okay.
In that the application will have to do some stuff, but in some cases, like with Doctrine and with Hibernate, where the applications use ORM, we have modifications available for those so that it does become closer to transparent. What I would say is the difference between something like, let's say, MySQL replication, which is the actual HA technology, or DRBD, or something like that. Fabric really sits at a layer above that and says, I'm going to help you orchestrate that. So,
okay. But at the moment, I guess what you're describing is Fabric is not trying to be scale-based or power elastic. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay.
Yeah. So at the moment, as well, I guess an easy way of separating out the differences is Fabric doesn't do things like cross-server, cross-shard queries or anything like that. All it is that many people were solving this problem prior, where they were doing sharding, and they were solving it in very similar ways. We're stepping in and say we're going to create some common tools to be able to make this problem easier.
Okay.
And if you were someone like Facebook, as the example that's sharded, maybe with an existing system you might not retrofit in Fabric. It might not make sense to you, but maybe the next Facebook would use Fabric. And we're trying to make a really scalable design proxyless, so that there isn't, it's not a medium-sized solution. It's a file management solution. And even if you were someone like Facebook, I think it's very good that we've stepped into this space, because it makes us eat dog food. And if you see things like MySQL 5.7, the replication team has added the ability to change masters while still processing the events of the previous master. And that was very much a Fabric requested feature to be able to do that. And you don't have to use Fabric to take advantage of that. I really think it's a good place for us to step into, given that so many people are using MySQL in this way.
Okay, but I think what you really answered for me is at the moment, and this could change down the road, but at the moment, a problem Fabric is not trying to solve is the make several servers appear as one server problem, right?
That's
like
correct.
I'm not gonna throw a query and it's gonna get parceled out to a bunch of servers. They all do work. It comes back to one. It does additional work. I get one result set back.
That's correct. And there's nothing specifically limiting that from being part of the future. But there's
Sure.
a lot of value in stepping in this. Let's call it orchestration or framework space.
Okay, that's helpful. Saying it in that many words, it gets my mind around the problem it's trying to solve right now. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and that's actually really good that you guys worked this out and called this out, because I mean, one of the things that we're looking at, we're trying to bring Fabric into our environment and be able to use it, and so we've already built out a sharded architecture that
Right.
is conscious of where things are, and we're still at a point though where even though our application is shard aware, we still have to do the work of kind of moving servers around and splitting. That part's still a little manual. And so something like Fabric, I think might be able to fit into our environment. It's just a matter of we have to kind of work it in over time. And one of the prerequisites, obviously, is getting GTIDs turned on and getting upgraded to newest versions of 5.6 to get that. But I mean, it's definitely one of those. If you're kind of a newer shop or you're running 5.6 already, like I don't know, unless you have some other experience, Morgan. I feel like there's no reason not to just try and build it with Fabric out of the box, just so that you kind of have that there for free.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think there's a lot of common elements that every sharding deployment has. And it's sometimes easy to get started with sharding, but it's hard to rebalance, and it's hard to split and move shards. And you would really not want to manage that code if you had a choice. It's better to outsource that. I think the quote I like the most here is that any code is really technical debt, and that you have to maintain that. So if you get a choice of not maintaining that, it's nice to see an efficient, supported solution.
The other thing I wanted to ask, though, so now that we're kind of working our way into this, is so being able to be aware of as you said, think of it as an orchestrator, and so being aware of the things that you have available. How does that work? So one of the things we do know is that a prerequisite is if you have Fabric running, you need a Fabric-aware connector. Yes. So what kind of interaction happens there? And if you want, maybe we can walk into a demo at this point, or we can maybe just talk it out a little more, or put up a diagram. It's up to you.
Yeah, let's try and talk it out so that it doesn't fail on me. I've got some experimental software, and I've got MySQL Sandbox, and I've got different versions. And I did try and get a demo running, and I might be able to do it, but I'll warm myself up to that. So the Fabric-aware connector, it speaks to a Fabric daemon. It's a Python server. It's the MySQL Fabric piece that you download. It stores its configuration in a backing store. And what will happen is that the connectors, as they first want to figure out which server they're supposed to connect to, they'll speak to this Fabric daemon, which will give it a dump of the topology. Servers are in HA groups, so you can have a primary and you can have secondary roles. So you can say that a server is available as read and write, or it's available just for reads, or it's not available for any of those. You can set some role, but if a server was to fail, MySQL Fabric, it can detect that, and I believe the connectors can actually phone home advice and say that I'm having issues with this. And then the topology can change so that what was a primary server can now be removed, and a secondary server can be promoted in its place. So I guess this is quite a cloud-friendly architecture to be able to do this at the connectors as well. It's a big demand from customers to have failover built into the product. If you're running your own data center, I think what was common a few years ago is that you might have a virtual IP address, and you would flip that VIP to say what's the primary, and maybe you'd have something like MMM or MHA to do that. We're taking the different approach where the connectors themselves will know that they're supposed to connect to a different server now. Does that handle that piece? That was sort of where your question was.
Yeah, no, that answers it. And so I had another thought that I had just lost, but it was around the right. So you had mentioned it ships the topology over to the client. So two questions I had here is it actually up to the client to decide, given the topology, what it should do or what kind of connection it can make, or does the Fabric daemon itself actually dictate some more of that? Like, does it annotate the topology it sends with additional information?
Yeah, it says the roles. So if something's a primary and something's a secondary, if there's multiple reader roles, I think that's decided by weight. Nodes actually have a weight which determines failover. I don't know if that's used for the read balancing as well, but that policy would have to be, well, that picking a read if there's multiple readers would have to be decided by the clients.
Okay.
Based on what the service described in a dump.
So with that, what other information can you use? Like, so you have the notion of weighting. You can say maybe favor this slave for reading over another slave. Can you also dictate like what determines that weight or that health? Like, could we say a higher weight is given to a slave that is more caught up on replication than another, perhaps? Or is that something that you can influence directly through kind of a plugin script API or something?
I'm not sure of the answer to that one, but it's very practical and it's very common. Historically, in my experience, to pull slaves out of a pool if they fall behind.
Okay.
And this will still be a problem in 5.6. Hopefully it won't be as much of a problem in 5.7 where there'll be intra-schema parallel slaves.
Okay. And so another one, though, is I remember when I had first seen the presentation at MySQL Connect and the Fabric was being discussed, and it was called out that Fabric should run on a node that is, very, I would say, durable, because you don't want your Fabric daemon to go away, and you want to make sure that that is, in the current way that's put together, it sounds like that is actually your single point of failure. Whatever daemon Fabric is running on, if that has an issue, then things might kind of go awry. And there's not a notion of having two Fabric daemons running that are in an HA setup right now.
Right.
So I guess the question there is, what plans are there in the future to address that, if that is actually the problem right now? And then the other one is, what happens when your Fabric daemon goes down currently? Like, what is the state of things? Do clients fail? Do they have some other thing?
Right. So the Fabric server that the clients speak to over XML RPC, if that were to fail, the clients have a cache. And as long as the topology doesn't change, everything will keep working. So from that element, it's safe, but obviously things do fail. And one thing operationally that a lot of people know is that things sort of chain fail as well. So Fabric, the daemon, it is possible to make that HA currently, but it's maybe not as shrink wrapped as potentially it could be in the future. So Fabric, the daemon, it speaks to MySQL as a backing store. And so you could have multiple Fabric daemons communicate to that MySQL backing store and probably put them behind a load balancer or something like that. Is that a officially supported topology? I'm not quite sure yet. We were discussing it last week internally, but that would be an easy way to be able to get some HA there. Of the backing store of Fabric, well, it's interesting. Wouldn't you want to manage that by Fabric then? Because you want that to be HA. And so that MySQL database, you actually could technically put in something like MySQL cluster in place, which offers native HA. I don't know if that's a supported solution yet either, but certainly that, I hope, answers your question.
No, that addresses it. And so the thing that the follow-up I would ask then is, is there any thought around two things? One is setting up, so let me back up. So being able to put being able to put Fabric behind a proxy setup or a load balancer or something like that, that pretty much solves the problem with that. But then the concern around the backend store being kind of a single point of failure that you might need to work with. So the thought around that is it possible that we could store the data in a more durable I'm going to put durable in quotes, a more durable service that has maybe slightly stronger guarantees. And the first one coming to mind for me, and it's just because of what we have in our environment right now, would be Zookeeper. It's a quorum-based system that you can use for distributed lock management or lightweight data storage. And so that's one of the things where I'd wonder maybe having Fabric write to a Zookeeper cluster, which I have a stronger guarantee of that being available, might be a way to do it. And so is it possible to patch that in ourselves? Would that be a future plugin or direction maybe?
Yeah, I'm not sure on that answer. It's an interesting question. I can see the value in it. Certainly, I think it would be very easy to have multiple Fabric daemons, but then it comes to the backing store. Is it easier for us to suggest MySQL cluster as a backing technology, or is it easier to Zookeeper?
Fair enough.
Not sure.
So just to call out, so David Stokes is in the chat, but it sounds like his microphone's not working. And so he had just mentioned that the Fabric team is looking for ways to keep from having a single point of failure in the current architecture and are looking for input. So David, if you want, ping me a little more in chat about how that should be done. Is it proper for folks to go through the bug reporting system or some other way to kind of, I don't know, vote on maybe better ways to make this less of a single point of failure?
Yeah, the bug reporting system is great. If there isn't a current feature request that's open that suggests this as a potential issue, it's always good to have one there so we can point to it and always reference it. Often if there's a bug report or a feature where there's many opportunities of ways of implementing it, the Fabric team, they're going to reach out from there and they're going to ask more questions because they're curious about use cases. This is why we really opened it up at MySQL Connect last year. We're at a point of, it wasn't stable yet, but we wanted to get feedback and we wanted to know if we ship with this functionality, would this be useful? Those sorts of questions.
Okay. And again, David also just mentioned telling Morgan, telling him are good ways to submit feedback on this, filing bugs, and even just writing blog posts. So sounds like those are all good ways to kind of get your take on maybe the best way to solve the problem. So Morgan, I do have another question, and that is how many folks are using Fabric right now, like that you've talked to, and what ways are they using it?
Hopefully not many, in that it's not a officially stable product. We are approaching the end of that cycle, where it's now release candidate. So I haven't worked with any specific customers yet myself that use it. I'm sort of just the community guy, so I don't do any customer work. But we've been able to accept some contributions from some community people, code contributions, just the last couple of weeks, which has been nice. So I think that's a positive sign that some people are using it.
Okay.
I have a question that's sort of a follow-up on that. I think at the moment, as this is headed toward GA, are people more likely to be trying this in a sort of, kind of greenfield, right, new development versus the folks like Jeff and others who've already implemented their own thing and might want to unwind? Like, what's in it for them, right? Like, is there value in unwinding what I've already built, or is this more is your goal in building this that people might stay with MySQL instead of looking to an alternative technology that natively offers this kind of functionality?
I think the answer is both. There's a practical question as to how many will unravel architecture, and I think that's not many. But certainly, if someone's just made a couple of steps in the direction, and they have a very simple sharding scheme, where it's either hash or range based, we might retrofit into that.
Okay.
I think that's the easiest way to answer that question. On a practical element, there's going to be a lot more greenfield, but I can see value where it retrofits well, that if I were in that position, I'd absolutely do it. I'd love to make this someone else's problem, because some of those scripts that you have to write to migrate between shards are very complicated and bug prone.
Yeah. So, oh, go ahead, Tim, if you had something to say.
One follow-up on that. I'm extremely uneducated in terms of the long-term licensing. Is this free and open source software?
This is. Yeah.
Okay, so if I'm an enterprise customer, I get commercial support for it, and if I'm community, I'm on my own?
That's right. So when you have an enterprise subscription, we will support this tool, and we'll answer the questions that you have. It's downloaded and shipped as part of the package that's MySQL Utilities, which is a set of other Python utilities, and it uses the same versioning scheme as MySQL Utilities, which is that it's currently at 1.4 release candidate, but it hasn't had a GA release itself specifically.
Okay.
So the other question I had is more on the sharding aspect. So every time I've looked at Fabric and kind of toyed around with it, it's always around what we mentioned earlier around orchestration and being able to do read-write splitting, and I have a cluster and being able to manage that. But I'm not as familiar with the aspect of sharding with it. And so I guess one of my thoughts is, or one of my questions is, how is using Fabric for sharding different than using something like MySQL cluster, for instance?
Right. So MySQL cluster for sharding, it's completely transparent. It will split the data based on hashing the key internally between a number of servers. And typically, you'll run with 2 copies, number of replicas equals 2. You can have an SQL interface on top of that, and you'll never know specifically that it's sharded, other than it affects certain performance characteristics. This is sharded any other storage engine, typically going to be InnoDB. Doesn't allow those cross-shard queries. It's not part of our scope for our initial release. Just allows you to orchestrate and do what you were already doing when you were splitting out your MySQL data between multiple groups of servers.
Okay, so I wouldn't depend on Fabric to actually do the split. I would define a new probably cluster or role that says this is shard 5, and here's the set of servers in that sharded cluster. Is that
That's
correct?
right.
Okay.
Yeah, so you will set up a HA group, and by default, if we were only using Fabric for HA, we'd probably have 1 group, and we'd have 3 members, and we'd say this is a primary and these are 2 secondaries. And they would use global transaction IDs to replicate, and if the primary fails, a secondary can take over, based on some election, based on weight that we can specify. When we do sharding, what we do is we set up more HA groups, and we say this is the HA group that's global, and maybe there might be some global tables. This is a HA group for shard 1, and I'll have 3 servers. This is a HA group for shard 2, and I'll have 3 servers. And then we specify to say a key that we shard by, and that this table is sharded by this key, and it's going to store data in these shard groups.
Okay, and so having all this available and being able to get this all set up, and if you're in a large enough place, or if you're in a place that you're trying to bootstrap this automatically, you'll probably set it up to do build the configuration file through Puppet or Chef or something. And so that gets you kind of your starting config just to get everything turned on. Once you have this up and running, what's the management look like at that point? If you need to move things around or change things.
Right. So for the topology, that isn't a configuration file. That's the backing store, which is a MySQL server. And because that's live, I think that kind of makes more sense, in that things might have to be eliminated. There's a command line tool to be able to do that. It's called MySQL Fabric. So you can say MySQL Fabric demote such and such, or promote such and such node, or add a node to a group. Fabric has a configuration file as well to say what the password is for for clients to connect via the API and things like that. And that could quite easily be generated by something like Puppet or Chef. That just lives in Etsy MySQL Fabric.cfg.
Okay. Yeah, that answers that question.
Not anything specific I can add. There are some tools that they kind of separate configuration and let's call it nodes, and the nodes might be in configuration files, and sorry, I should say configuration and state, and then the current state might be in some live database. In the case of Fabric, that's really both in the backing store, and via the Fabric command line utility, you can change that topology, or it will change automatically as certain failure events happen.
Okay. So Dave Stokes just mentioned this MySQL performance blog post talking about Fabric, and specifically commenting that it's a really good example of getting it set up as an HA tool. And so this was written by Martin Arrieta and Fernando Apar. And I'll put the link in the show notes, but it looks like they have a Vagrant test environment you can get off of GitHub to kind of bootstrap all this. And so they have a lab that they've defined with the multiple nodes, and just kind of walking through all the configs you need to turn on in MySQL. So like Morgan was saying, GTID is a requirement here. And then, again, the MySQL Fabric management tool to kind of set all this stuff and tear it all down. And so actually, Morgan, if I can convince you, if you're comfortable enough, I'd love to see kind of an on-the-fly demo if you think you can do it.
Let's try it.
Okay.
I think we're about time. So a bit of an amateur question. How do I turn on my screen?
Sure. So on the left pane, there's a little green box with an arrow called Screen Share. Click on that, and then select the program you want to put on the screen.
Okay. Let's hope that's the right one. I just have to do a grant of privileges in system preferences.
Sure. It looks like we have an inactive terminal displaying right now.
Okay. How's that? Do you see a terminal now?
Yep, and I see a Control-C that looks like it didn't work.
Okay. No problem. So what I have running here is I have MySQL 5.6.17 with MySQL Fabric as MySQL Fabric's backing store. So I downloaded the Fabric release candidate just from that website that you showed earlier. I downloaded the Python connector, and then I edited the Fabric configuration file, and okay. And said that on localhost 3306, username Fabric, password secret, store the data in the schema called Fabric. And I made a couple of other changes to configuration to say for the XML RPC protocol, my password is going to be secret as well. This is very similar to configuration to what's in a quick start guide that's in the MySQL manual. Then what I had to say, and I'll just show the as comments the setup steps that I ran. I loaded MySQL. I created a Fabric user, and then I said MySQL Fabric manage setup. So install your schema. From there, I started MySQL Fabric. It actually fails the first time that it starts up, and it says that you have to set a password. So I set a password, and I set my password just to secret. This is what got me to the point of where I had that daemon running in the background that I'm just going to start back up. And it says that there's multiple threads running to listen from clients, and stuff's allowed to happen. So in another terminal window, perhaps, maybe I can split this tab. And do you see two tabs? Does that work successfully in the video? Or do you see one tab? See two tabs. Okay, I see a nod.
Yep, we see two.
Okay. Then what I can do is that I can say MySQL Fabric group. That'll give me an option of choices that I can have. I can add a group, and I'm going to say group 1 is the name of my new group that I'm going to add. Group add. Let me just make sure that I've got that syntax correct. Our group create. Group 1. Well, let's call it group global. It says that new HA group has been successfully created. Now what I can do is I can add members to that group. So I have two other copies of MySQL running on my local machine here. One is 5.6.15 and one is 5.6.16. So I'm going to add, using MySQL Sandbox, 5.6.15. Oh. And it tells me that it's actually already in another group that I've created inside here. Okay. But hypothetically, if that were to be successful, I would get some sort of message that says, successful, this server has been added to this group. And I could add my other server and say, please add that server.
So out of curiosity, with the kind of hash that's being printed back with the preface of procedure, what does UUID, finish, success, what do all those indicate when you're running these commands?
So that's the server's UUID that's automatically generated. If you've seen in MySQL 5.6, there's an auto.cnf file that's created inside the server's directory. I guess you can call it a replacement for server ID. And this is what's used with replication GTIDs to uniquely identify a server.
Gotcha.
So Fabric has nicely said that this server can only belong to one group, and you already have a group created, so I'm not going to allow that to be part of another group. You know, if it were to do things like failover commands, this might cause problems.
Gotcha. Okay.
I think that's a good place to maybe successfully end the demo, where it's it's working successfully. I'll maybe just show one more command to say that I can look up servers for a particular group, and this is another group that I had running called my group that actually had those two other servers as a member. And you can see my current state to say that I've got a server in secondary. That's this server UUID that's read-only, and I have another server in secondary. I actually hadn't set up replication between the two servers successfully in time before DB Hangoff started. So.
Okay, so actually looking at this, so it looks like when you run this MySQL Fabric command line tool interactively, is this actually querying through the XMLRPC interface to get this information back?
I actually believe it is. Or if not, this same data, it's available via the interface where it can do things like dump commands.
Gotcha. So so another follow-up question then is, what is the kind of prescribed method for doing all this editing? You know, should you always use the tool? Is it safe to automatically maybe populate the backing store database? Or what are kind of the approaches there?
Yeah, I think we would prefer you to use the API commands, because that way we can invalidate the clients. If you were to just update the database, it's hard to be able to send a trigger and discover that successfully.
Gotcha. Okay.
Has it been tested to just update the backing store? I don't think that there has been work in that area, and I think you probably could cause problems.
Okay. Cool. Give me 1 sec. Someone else just joined.
No problem.
Yeah, it looks like Gavin just joined, but his microphone's muted and he's on the move. So because yeah, so some background is Gavin was actually the person that was putting together a lot of Fabric in our infrastructure and kind of getting it validated and auto configured. And it looks like he can speak for himself now.
Yeah, sorry, I'm joining a little late. I just caught the end of that last explanation. I've been trying to set it up. I've been doing kind of a proof of concept in an alternate environment we have, and so far I really like it. I was using Puppet to do auto configuration, auto discovery, and stuff like that using Fabric, kind of having a daemon service that looks for new nodes with the right role being assigned to them from Puppet, then automatically contacts the Fabric process to add them to the cluster.
Nice.
There's, I guess, the things that I was looking at is, yeah, I was hoping I could share that at some point once I have it kind of nice and wrapped up. You know, I've been writing the scripts in Python, so hopefully, like right now, it was just calling the Fabric API, and I hadn't even looked into like maybe just using the Fabric code itself, like including their libraries in the script and calling it directly instead of having to go through the API layer, which might be an improvement.
Yeah, and I think
I was wondering if you had dealt.
I think what you're doing
go ahead.
would actually
like
be
a little bit delayed.
Would be supported, at least with the MySQL utilities. I'm not sure as much with Fabric. They are very much largely a set of command line tools that are a reference implementation for an API, and they are quite possible and easy to extend. So I'm not sure what's public and what's private of APIs in MySQL Fabric land, but I think there's opportunity to do as you describe and use the APIs directly rather than the command line. At the moment, I believe the official way is use the command line.
Yeah. Okay. There's one question I haven't answered for myself yet. Is what happens if you have a running Fabric cluster and your Fabric management process goes away?
Right.
Yeah.
We covered this earlier. So as long as you have no topology changes, you're fine. If there's a topology change, you can't really decide that without the Fabric daemon being there.
Okay, so the clients don't connect to the Fabric server first to like get any initial information. They get it by connecting directly to the servers.
Well, the clients cache what they received from Fabric.
So if they don't have a cached copy, like if it's a new client or something like that, then do they need to talk to the Fabric server?
Yeah, I believe they would have to.
Okay, so it seems like it is the case that without the Fabric server running, then your cluster is going to be in some kind of maybe partially available state. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that was kind of the next problem I was trying to solve, is how to maybe implement some kind of HA for the Fabric server node, either by replicating all the changes from one to a second copy. I know, since it does use a database, you could have a central database that they're both writing to, but then your database just becomes another point of failure itself.
Well, it does have a central database. Fabric itself is stored in the backing store, which is MySQL. So you can have, what we were actually chatting about earlier, you can have Fabric manage Fabric, but then you get a recursion problem, which is what's going to manage Fabric.
Right. I was trying to set up my Fabric management nodes in kind of like a shared nothing system where the backing store is on a local MySQL database, and that would assumed to be more or less transient. I was seeing if I could make the synchronization between Fabric nodes happen at a higher level, like either they communicate between each other using the Fabric protocol or something like that,
right,
to do changes. So that way you don't have to get into this whole mess of how do you manage the Fabric database, and do you manage it differently than all your other databases, which is being managed by Fabric, or the recursion problem, like you said.
Yeah, that's almost like a third option to the two we were discussing before. One was that the backing store could be MySQL cluster, which I believe works, but I'm not sure if it's officially supported yet.
Okay.
All development's been with within ODB. The second was Jeff's question, which is could you use a different database like Zookeeper or something like that as the backing store? And I don't know if we've looked at that one. And then the third option is that you could have multiple Fabric daemons with their own backing stores and have them cluster and cross-talk. They all update each other. And I don't think we've picked any particular decision there. We'd love feedback as to what's the best path.
Yeah, I think in my opinion, Zookeeper is nice, it's reliable, it's understood, but it adds another component that you have to like learn and configure and set up machines for it and stuff like that, so that's the kind of downside of that. I think in my ideal world, it would be nice to just have the Fabric nodes kind of replicate their changes to like a secondary Fabric node or something like that, and do something like that.
Or even having the Fabric nodes in a quorum-based setup where, similar to Zookeeper, where you have 3 of them, there's a leader that it encourages all of them to receive the same changes, and then they can manage the changes they store in a local data store to themselves.
Yeah. I think I had mentioned this to Mats Kindle a while ago, and I think he said that they are working on something for that. I mean, not something for the HA side of the Fabric nodes, but he didn't specify exactly how they were thinking of solving that yet.
Yeah, I mean, at a simple level, if Fabric's backing store could be a HA group itself, you would probably solve the problem. And then you would just have to put the Fabric daemons themselves behind a load balancer and make sure that they don't keep local caches so that they don't serve stale data.
Yeah, and it lends itself really well because the place I was developing this was in an EC2 environment, so it lends itself really well that if the Fabric nodes are just kind of their own quorum, that you just start a bunch of them and have some kind of discovery for those. Then you don't have to deal with too many other extra services on top of it.
Definitely, and we want adoption, so the easier to set up, the better it is. So
I'm curious.
That's great feedback. I'll certainly pass it along.
Okay, I'm curious if you've done, because I haven't really gotten into the client-side testing quite as much. I was wondering what your experience there was as far as performance of the Fabric, stuff like read-write splitting and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that Fabric either adds or hinders too much in that direction, and that it's really a framework for orchestrating these problems that are pre-existing.
Okay.
So it's proxyless. There's this initial discovery to find out which server you're supposed to connect to, and that is cached. So maybe there's a risk of a bug of not caching very efficiently or something like that. But for the most part, it shouldn't hinder too much in being direct calls to existing database servers and being able to do failover very quickly if a particular node has been discovered as unhealthy.
Right.
But the proof is always in the pudding. There's some opportunity to release some benchmarks, I'm sure.
Yeah. What's the process when a client is actively connected to a server and that happens to have a failure event? Does the client get an error message that it needs to handle and like do its own kind of reconnect call, or how is that handled? Yeah,
so I don't know all of the specific internals of how that works, but the design goals are that clients should be able to report health metrics back to Fabric. And Fabric should be able to tell clients if a particular server has failed.
Okay.
And the intricacies of in-flight, how that happens, I can tell you how I think it should happen. Have I tested every failure scenario myself? No.
Okay. Sure. Yeah, I'd like to hear.
Yeah, I'd be happy myself if everything failed. It was open in mid-flight and it was a transaction. It's just too much risky business to try and reconnect and figure out what to do.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay,
not that I speak for anyone else with that opinion, but I can see a whole can of worms.
Cool. So, I mean, we've got about 5 minutes left. So, any other questions that folks have, or should I start listening for some topics for the next time? I'm getting a lot of silence.
Yeah, I think you can go ahead and do topics for next time.
Okay. All right. Well, okay. In that case, Morgan, would we be seeing you next time as a participant?
Sure.
Fantastic. Sure. In that case, you can help influence topics for next time. Of which I have a very empty list. So please, anything that folks want to talk about, I'd love to hear. I'd love to know what people are working on, what kind of things we can discuss.
You could probably put what we were just discussing, which is best practices for handling failures.
Best practices for handling failures.
Is it good to lie to users and serve stale data? In which cases is it okay? Which cases should they get an error?
Yeah, and I would actually add to that, like one scenario in particular, that we could go on is how do you handle replication lag for replicas from the application side?
Right.
We're having a lot of discussions about that with our engineering team right now.
Yep.
Because that's like a partial failure state.
Exactly. And yeah, there's some ways you can. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. What else? Tim, is there anything you'd like to contribute for next time?
Not at the moment. I think over time and down the road, talking about other solutions in a similar space to Fabric, everything I can think of off the top of my head is commercial and closed source. But I think it's at least interesting to compare and contrast, like DB shards, for example. If you Google MySQL sharding, Fabric certainly comes up in the search results, as do a handful of other things, and at least noting the goals and a little bit about strengths and weaknesses of the various solutions, I think, is helpful. Morgan helped me on prior to this hour. I really thought that Fabric was also trying to solve the I throw a single query at a cluster and it marshals out the work and comes back with a unified solution, which actually Spider. I think we need to get someone from
Spider Engine,
at least from at least someone from SkySQL to talk about it. I'm not sure the author is comfortable or would do a good job presenting it, but how does Spider fit into this, if at all? Because Spider sounds really interesting, but I'm not sure 100% what goals it's trying to accomplish.
In the case of Fabric, they're orthogonal technologies, as we've sort of discussed. There's nothing specific as Fabric to using replication with GTIDs to manage HA groups. It could manage other pieces potentially.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's a good point. And yeah, actually, I had Spider written down from a previous time, and I think Jerry was going to see about getting someone for that. So I'll talk to him about it again.
Yeah, definitely Spider.
Yeah. What else, Tim? Do you have any scary schemas that you want to talk about next time?
I've got to go find another one, don't I? But I've only been at this for 2.5 years. You guys had better have much scarier schemas than I do.
Oh, let's just say scary schema, Tim Callahan.
Yeah,
there we go.
As long as your schema doesn't have box_net_, you can change the name to protect the innocent.
Well, I'm gonna put Tim on the hook. Okay, maybe I'll put Jeff on the hook for this.
Remember that time we were storing 12 megabyte blobs in a var binary field?
Okay, Tim, I have one I can do next time then. Storing blobs, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to know what happens when you get really wide rows in MySQL in general. I have evaluators that try it sometimes, and sometimes they're pleased, and sometimes not so much, but I haven't determined what the pattern is for success on row size.
Well, I might have a schema that we can talk about then. We'll see next time.
I know InnoDB okay. I'm not brilliant at it. I could describe some of those characteristics of what happens when you have very wide rows.
Cool. I'm going to put Morgan on the hook to talk about InnoDB for that then.
I'll do my research beforehand. Make sure I get a good answer.
Okay, well, I think that's enough stuff unless folks want to throw more things on. I'm always open to more topics.
No, the only other thing is Dave's got to bring a microphone next time, too.
Ah, yes, and microphone requirement for Dave.
Yeah, you can't
Perfect.
just show up with a pretty picture and no camera and no microphone. That doesn't count.
Okay. Well, on that note, we are at our time today. Thanks very much for everyone showing up. Morgan, thanks for being able to field questions today and pull a demo together like 15 minutes before. And yeah, we'll see you all in 2 weeks. Remember, new time is officially on Thursdays, 11 a.m. Pacific, which I think is 6 p.m. GMT. But I will always just check the blog post, and that's the best place to find it. All right. Thanks very much for coming today, everybody, and see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Bye for now.